Bonjour! I have traveled nearly 5,000 miles to be standing right here today to be testing these two very important motorcycles. We've got the new Escape X and Escape XR from Electric Motion.
We'll go into more detail about the specs and differences between the bikes later in the video. But the quick rundown is this. The XR features a 3.5 kilowatt hour battery, a new, bigger controller with 12 kilowatts of peak power and 6 kilowatts of nominal power, an upside-down FastAce fork, an R16V shock, and Nissin brakes front and rear. If the intro wasn't clear enough, we're at the Electric Motion HQ in France, and my tour guides are two riders that have more talent in their throttle hand than I have in my entire body. It's EM factory rider and four-time French Trials champion, Chris Brand. And former Enduro World Championship racer and coach, Nico DePero. Now, I've spent a lot of time on the Electric Motion Escape R, but in order to get an idea of some of the differences, I wanted to spin a few laps around the property on the Escape R before I swing a leg over the new XR. Electric Motion Escape XR startup procedure. You've got your button here, just like we have on the Escape R. And you've got your on and off switch here. You flick this to on, and then you've got your display here, which will tell you your battery percentage, your RPM, kilometers per hour, and which gear you're in. To select your gear, you've got plus and minus here. Plus, you're going to go 1, 2, and 3. When I click it into 2, you're going to see it's got TKO engaged, so the bike's going to go. That's why you have a clutch here to engage. You can hear the motor spinning there. And that's map 3, so we'll start it out in 2 and first ride. The first thing that stands out to me on the XR is that it feels much more like a quote-unquote dirt bike. The bike feels more upright, stable, and confident at speed. This is thanks to the upside-down fork with longer travel, which slightly slackens out the head tube angle and adds ground clearance. With every action, there is a reaction. So when you change the handling characteristics to this degree, it's expected that there will be compromise. The XR loses a certain amount of its nimble characteristics that the Escape R has, which is exactly as expected. It's not as quick turning or light feeling in the front, which the Escape R demonstrated a lot of, but I think this makes it a more balanced trail bike. While the Escape R leans slightly more on trials characteristics, the XR feels more like a trail or enduro bike. The overall power doesn't feel significantly different than the Escape R, but the power delivery feels slightly different. I usually avoid map 3 on the Escape R because of its abrupt nature, which is designed for trials. But on the XR, I felt that map 3 was smoother and more linear. Power is adequate for the bike, but don't expect it to be a hot rod. The XR gets 6 miles an hour more top speed. partially thanks to its smaller 38-tooth rear sprocket. So if you're wanting some more acceleration down low, it's understandable that you may want to go up a few teeth on the rear sprocket. With power output on the mind, it's probably a good time to show you the EM Connect app. Within the app, you're able to view total hours and battery cycles of the bike. It's got a dashboard feature that allows you to see speed, RPM, battery percentage, and ride mode. In general map settings, you can tune the throttle range, throttle dead zone, and brake force. From there, you can customize each of the three maps by tuning the throttle reactivity, the max power, and the max speed. You can also select or deselect the tickover setting and tune idle speed and idle torque. Now, back to the hardware. Stopping power is greatly improved thanks to the Nissin brakes with a 260mm front rotor and a 220mm rear rotor. Factoring in the increase in battery capacity, while being realistic about the increases in power and weight, I expect battery range to be a fairly significant improvement over the Escape R, but that will have to be officially tested at a later date. And if you could please point those uninformed viewers in the comments to this timestamp so that I can explain that this environment is impossible to test range due to the fact that during these first rides, we are constantly switching bikes, changing bike settings, resetting for the camera, and riding unusually. So when we get the bike in our hands at our normal riding area, that's when we're going to test range. Alright, so I promised more technical specifications, so let's get into that here. I'm going to point out the biggest differences between the Escape XR and the Escape R. The Escape XR has a different reinforced frame, a battery increase from 2.7 kilowatt hours to 3.5 kilowatt hours. More power thanks to a new controller. More top speed thanks to that as well. Traditional dirt bike suspension, specifically an upside down 35mm FastAce fork with 250 millimeters of travel. A higher seat height and more ground clearance. Bigger Nissin brakes, also featuring a larger rear brake pedal, and a proper front fender and number plate, or the optional headlight and tail light. Now let's point out the differences between the XR and the X. The XR has a hydraulic clutch, although because of the motor setup, you do have the option of adding a clutch to the X if you decide to do that later down the road. The X fork is standard, whereas the XR fork is prepped in-house at the Electric Motion factory. The X shock is standard, whereas the XR shock is a reservoir style for better cooling. The X sees a different controller with 1 kilowatt less power. The X is roughly 1 kilogram heavier than the XR due to its added components. The X comes with a 15 amp charger, whereas the XR comes with a 25 amp charger. In terms of street legality, the X already meets those requirements in Europe, and we're told that it will soon meet those requirements in the USA as well. Overall, the XR generally fits my riding style better. I'm not a hard enduro rider or a trials fiend, but more so a fast single track and mountain rider. The XR is a bit better at speed, addressing my former frustrations with the Escape R's suspension and ergonomics. The X and XR are two exciting new bikes in what is quickly becoming my favorite category of e-moto, which I'm calling midweight e-moto. We hope to do a lot more riding with this bike in 2024, so let us know what you want to know for future videos. And as always, thanks for watching.